For 12 long years, Thorne Whitmore had spoken more to cattle and wind than to people. His ranch, isolated and silent, lay untouched by the outside world, just as he wanted it. Ever since the fire took his family and rumors chased him into exile, Thorne had chosen silence over pain, solitude over judgment. His land was a fortress of forgotten things, memories buried deeper than the roots of the cottonwoods that bordered his fields. But that morning, silence bled. It was the blood that told the story first smears along the fence posts, dark and drying under the sun. Thorne followed it with cautious steps, rifle loose in his calloused hand. 30 feet ahead, slumped against the weathered wood, was a woman. Her dress was torn dirt, and blood streaking her skin hair matted to her face. She looked half-conscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Alive, but barely. Thorne's jaw tightened. He hadn't seen another soul on this land in over a decade. Now, here she was like a ghost conjured by his past. He should have walked away. Every instinct told him so. Helping strangers brought complications. Complications brought danger. And Thorne Whitmore had sworn never to be involved in anyone's story again, least of all one written in blood. But when she stirred and let out a weak, pain-laced gasp, something cut through the wall he'd spent 12 years building. He stepped forward. Then again. Shadows shifted. Her eyes fluttered open, green, sharp, afraid, but also pleading. "Please," she whispered, voice barely audible. "They're coming." Just 2 words. But they shattered everything. Killers. Chasing her. That meant they would come here, and that meant Thorne no longer had a choice. He crouched, keeping his rifle across his knees, distance still between them. "Who's coming?" he asked, scanning the horizon. The wind carried nothing yet, but it would. She winced as she adjusted pain flickering across her face. Men. From Dead Rock Canyon. 3, maybe 4. Been tracking me since yesterday. Dead Rock. That name stirred something grim in Thorne. 40 miles south. Mining town with no law worth mentioning and even less mercy. Men from Dead Rock didn't chase women across open country for nothing. They killed for profit, silenced for sport. "What did you do?" he asked sharply. Her eyes narrowed with wounded anger. "What makes you think I did anything?" "In my experience," he replied, "innocent people don't end up bleeding on my fence with death on their heels." She looked away. For a moment, he thought she'd stay silent. Then, softly, she answered. "I saw them kill a family. The Hendersons. They had a claim near the canyon, found something valuable. I was just there for supplies. Wrong place, wrong time." Thorne studied her. Her voice trembled not with deceit but with memory. The kind of memory that left bruises deeper than fists. "So you ran," he said. She nodded. "You'd have done the same. They killed a whole family. You think they'd hesitate with me?" A faint sound drifted over the plains, distant hoofbeats. Horses, riding hard. Thorne stood, rifle ready. "They're coming." The woman tried to rise but staggered, gripping the fence for support. "Please, I won't bring trouble. Just point me toward water. I'll keep running." But it was too late. If she'd led them here, then the fight was already on his doorstep. And if they were willing to murder a family, they wouldn't spare a rancher who'd helped a witness. Thorne calculated. 4 riders, probably armed, desperate. His solitude, his peace had just expired. He reached out. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. "What's your name?" he asked as he helped her up. "Seraphina Caldwell," she whispered. "Well, Sarah," he said grimly, "we're about to get real familiar with my root cellar." And as Thorne Whitmore half carried the stranger toward his house, The first beat of war drums echoed across his land, sounding a death knell for the quiet life he'd once known. The cellar beneath Thorne's kitchen had always been meant for him. Built with quiet hands and years of paranoia, it held the remnants of a life half-lived, dried food, clean water, a backup rifle, even an old Colt wrapped in oiled cloth. He had prepared it for the day his past might knock on the door. He never expected that day would come wearing a woman's voice and a blood-stained dress. Sarah lay on the cellar floor, her back against a stack of grain sacks, the lantern above her casting a dull glow over her pale face. She clutched her side, sweat slicking her brow, breath shallow. Thorne handed her a damp cloth and a small flask of water. "Start from the beginning," he said, kneeling across from her. She looked up at him. Mistrust still clouded her expression, but exhaustion had weakened the walls she'd built. She took a sip, then spoke. "I was in Dead Rock Canyon 2 days ago. Came in on horseback to buy supplies, nothing special. Flour, salt, a few things I needed for the road. I stopped by the Hendersons' place first." Thorne said nothing. He knew of the Hendersons' honest folk husband-wife, a little girl, maybe 8 years old. They'd filed a claim along the western bluff. Rumor had it they'd struck something deeper than rock and richer than silver. But rumors in Dead Rock were like dust, always swirling, rarely landing. Sarah continued, her voice a whisper. "I was there maybe 20 minutes. Long enough to chat with Mrs. Henderson, play a minute with their daughter. Sarah, same name as mine. Sweet kid." Thorne saw the flicker in her eyes, then the one that came before the pain broke through. "I was in the barn when it happened," she said. "Heard voices. Men. Arguing. Mr. Henderson shouting. Then gunshots. 3 of them. Then a scream. Her hands were trembling now. She stared past Thorne like the memory played on the wall behind him. I stayed hidden, watched through the slats, saw them drag the bodies out. The husband, the wife, even the child. They tossed them into the dry creek bed like garbage." Her voice cracked. "The girl, she wasn't dead. Not at first." Thorne exhaled slowly, rage crawling up his spine. "I saw their faces," Sarah said, regaining some control. "One of them was Kane Murdoch. The other 2, I didn't know. They were laughing, Thorne, laughing. And they saw you?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not then. But I couldn't leave them like that. I rode straight to the sheriff's office in Dead Rock. But the deputy told me Sheriff Morrison was out on patrol. Said he'd pass along the message. I should have known. I think he warned them instead." Thorne nodded grimly. That would fit. Corruption ran deep in towns like Dead Rock, where gold dust bought silence and silver bought bullets. "That night they came for me," Sarah continued. "Broke into the inn where I was staying. I barely got out with my horse and what I had on me. Rode until the horse collapsed. Been on foot since. They shot me back at the river bend, but I kept moving." She paused, breathing ragged. "Didn't know where I was going. Just away. Then I saw your fence." Thorne stood and paced the small cellar. Her story was madness, except it wasn't. The Hendersons were real. So was Kane Murdoch. And that red clay mud he'd seen on Murdoch's boots didn't come from anywhere near his ranch. Only one place in the territory had it in that color. Dead Rock. "I'm not asking you to risk yourself," Sarah said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "You didn't ask for this. I'll leave as soon as I'm strong enough." "You won't make it 10 miles, Thorne muttered. "I have to try. Someone has to speak for the Hendersons." That stopped him cold. He turned, met her eyes. She didn't flinch. "You really plan to testify?" he asked. "If I don't," she said softly, "they'll die twice, once in that canyon, and again in silence." He stared at her, at the bruises on her jaw, the dried blood on her dress. The girl who'd been a shadow on his fence hours ago now sat upright, spine like iron. "You realize testifying means staying alive until then," Thorne said. "Means staying here, with me. For now." A long pause. Then Sarah nodded. "I'm not running any more." Thorne sighed and rubbed a hand down his weathered face. "Then we need to make a plan, because those men won't stop until you're dead, and I've got no patience left for burying bodies on my land." The two of them, once strangers now bound by blood murder and the fragile thread of truth, sat in silence. Outside, the prairie wind howled, but below in the cellar a spark had been lit. The first sign was the dust cloud. Thorne Whitmore spotted it just past noon, low and fast on the southern horizon. The wind carried the distant thunder of hooves too many for a simple traveler too focused for a patrol. He stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching it come. Every inch of him knew what this was. "They're here," he muttered. Below, in the root cellar, Sarah waited. He'd restocked her bandages, given her food water, even a clean revolver his old Colt rarely used but always loaded. She hadn't argued when he told her to stay hidden. But he could still feel the weight of her eyes beneath his floorboards, watching, waiting. The riders came fast, just as she'd warned. 4 of them spreading out in formation like wolves scenting blood. The one in front rode a black gelding and moved like a man used to giving orders. Even from 50 yards, Thorne recognized the cruel angle of his scar, the line that carved down from ear to jaw like a knife mark that never healed. Kane Murdoch. They stopped just short of the porch. Dust billowed between them. Murdoch raised a hand, not in greeting, but in authority. "You Whitmore," he called out. Thorne rested his rifle casually against his hip. "Depends who's asking." "Kane Murdoch. We're tracking someone, woman, dangerous, passed through here. You seen her?" Thorne didn't blink. "Haven't seen a soul in weeks. Gets lonely out here." Murdoch's eyes narrowed. Behind him, one of the riders dismounted and began scanning the fence line. "Funny," Murdoch said, sliding off his horse. "Trail we followed ends at your property. Blood trail, too. Woman was bleeding bad when she ran." "Coyotes," Thorne said flatly. "Come through here regular. Maybe your girl tangled with one." Another rider called from the barn, "Fresh tracks. Someone rode out this morning." "My tracks," Thorne said before Murdoch could ask. "Check the fence line after sunrise. Broken post out back." Murdoch studied him for a moment. Then, without warning, he stepped toward the porch. Thorne's grip on the rifle tightened. "I'd like to look around," Murdoch said, already mounting the steps. Thorne took one step forward, not enough to aim, but enough to warn. "I'd rather you didn't." Murdoch smiled without warmth. "Wasn't asking." His men moved then, one to the barn, another toward the well, the third circling wide to flank the house. Trained, disciplined, not just thugs, killers. But none of them noticed the bloodstain near the base of the porch. Not until Curtis, the tracker, pointed. Blood, fresh, leading to the house. Thorne's stomach dropped. Murdoch followed the trail with his eyes. His smile grew sharp. "Well now, seems your coyotes walk upright. I don't know what you think she's here." Murdoch cut him off. "Inside. And unless you want us tearing your place apart, you'll hand her over." Thorne's silence spoke volumes. Murdoch's fingers drifted toward his holster. That was when it happened. The trap door creaked. "Damn it," Thorne whispered. Sarah's voice came faint but clear. "Let me help. I can shoot." "Stay down," Thorne hissed, but she was already climbing. Pale, bleeding eyes fierce. The Colt in her hand trembled only slightly. "Kane," she called, stepping beside Thorne. You missed." Murdoch laughed a cold, bitter sound. "You should have stayed dead, girl." "She saw what you did," Thorne said, stepping slightly in front of her. "She saw you kill the Hendersons. And now you'll both be buried with them," Murdoch said, drawing. But Thorne was faster. His rifle cracked. Curtis dropped dead before his gun cleared leather. Chaos erupted. Murdoch dove behind his horse as the two remaining gunmen opened fire. Bullets punched into the porch, splinters flying. Thorne rolled behind the heavy bench, reloading fast. Sarah returned fire, ducking behind a post. The Colt barked defiantly. They were outnumbered, pinned. "We won't win a straight fight," Thorne growled. "I didn't plan on dying today," Sarah replied through gritted teeth. Then Thorne remembered the dynamite stashed in the barn for blasting tree roots. Risky, crude, but maybe their only chance. "Can you keep them busy for 2 minutes? I'll try." He looked at her. Not just a witness anymore, a partner. "For the Hendersons," she whispered, and Thorne ran. Bullets sang past him as he sprinted toward the barn. Behind him, Sarah's gun roared. Thorne's boots pounded across the dry earth each step toward the barn, a gamble against death. Bullets tore through the wind behind him, chewing into fence rails and sending up dust in jagged spurts. His shoulder slammed into the barn door and he tumbled inside just as a shot clipped the edge of the frame. He hit the ground, rolling, gasping, ears ringing. The scent of hay sweat and oil filled his lungs. Somewhere behind him, Sarah fired again, steady brave. He could hear Murdoch's men shouting boots, scattering for cover. Time. That's all he needed. He scrambled to the back corner, wrenching open the wooden crate marked with a faded skull and crossbones. Inside, 2 sticks of dynamite, fuses intact. Crude, but enough to change the odds. His fingers, rough from years of labor, struggled with the matchbook. A strike, a hiss. Sparks raced along the first fuse. 20 seconds. Cradle in the lit stick, Thorne sprinted for the barn doors. Outside, Sarah crouched behind the porch beam, blood on her sleeve and dirt streaked across her cheek. Her lips were tight, jaw clenched, but her hand held steady on the Colt. The rhythm of her gunfire kept their attackers from getting bold. Thorne emerged from the barn dynamite in one hand, rifle in the other. "Sarah," he shouted. She looked up, understood in an instant. Murdoch's men were clustered behind the water trough. Thorne hurled the explosive high an awkward, arcing throw that landed with a thunk and a trail of smoke. A heartbeat passed. Then the explosion rocked the earth. The trough shattered in a spray of splinters and metal. Dirt geysered into the air. One man was flung backwards, unmoving. The other crawled dazed toward the fence line, blood streaking his back. But Murdoch had used the chaos to move. Suddenly, he was at the base of the porch steps, revolver aimed at Sarah. "Drop it, Whitmore," Murdoch snarled, "or she dies." Thorne froze, rifle half raised. 30 feet separated them too far for a quick shot, too close to gamble with Sarah's life. Sarah turned her head slowly, her green eyes finding Thorne's. "Don't let him win," she whispered. Murdoch's finger tightened, but he never saw the second stick of dynamite. Thorne had lit it behind his back, rolled it low, silent as a shadow. It came to a stop at Murdoch's boots, the fuse spitting like a snake. Murdoch's eyes widened. He had 3 seconds. He chose wrong. The blast lifted him off the ground. His revolver spun through the air. He landed in a crumpled heap beside the stairs, motionless. Smoke curled around the porch. Silence followed. Then Sarah exhaled. Thorne rushed to her side. Her hand trembled, the Colt still gripped tightly. "You all right?" She nodded, eyes on the smoldering crater. The last of Murdoch's men, wounded, scorched, was nowhere to be seen. Likely, he'd run to sudden justice and Dead Rock was safer than Thorne Whitmore's explosives. The danger had passed, but peace didn't return all at once. The porch was splintered, the well cracked, the fence scorched and torn. But Sarah was alive, Thorne was alive, and Murdoch was finally finished. They sat together on the ruined steps, breathing in the thick, acrid air. "Is it over?" Sarah asked. Thorne scanned the horizon, flat, empty, and quiet again. "Yeah," he said finally, "it's over, for now." The air still trembled with the force of the blast, the dust not yet settled when Thorne and Sarah locked eyes across the porch. His lungs burned from the sprint, his ears rang like church bells, but his rifle stayed steady in his grip. One man down, another fleeing into the prairie. Two remained Kane Murdoch and a gunman who now crouched behind the barn wall, unsure whether to run or keep fighting. Thorne's heartbeat hammered louder than the gunfire that had preceded it. He dropped beside Sarah. She was pale blood soaking through the makeshift bandages on her arm, but she hadn't loosened her grip on the Colt. "You good?" he asked. She nodded once, breath shaky. "I'm not letting them win." From behind the barn, a single shot cracked. A splinter burst from the porch post beside Sarah's head. She flinched, but didn't falter. Thorne narrowed his eyes. "They're not retreating." "No," Sarah said grimly. "They're regrouping." Then came the voice that made both of them freeze. Whitmore Murdoch's call rang out closer now. "This ends now. Send her out, and maybe I let you keep breathing." Thorne stood slowly peeking through the smoke and dust. Murdoch had moved again, weaving through cover like a man who knew how to hunt. His revolver glinted in the afternoon light, still deadly steady. Then Thorne saw it. Murdoch was creeping along the flank of the porch boots, crunching softly over shattered stone. His pistol raised not at Thorne, at Sarah. Thorne moved instinctively. Sarah down. But she'd already seen him. Sarah shifted to meet the threat, but her body betrayed her. The pain in her side stole her speed. Her hand shook as she tried to lift the Colt again. Murdoch stepped into view. His face was a mask of rage and satisfaction. "Pretty trick with the dynamite," he sneered. "But this ends with me, sweetheart. Always did." Why Sarah croaked. Why kill a little girl? Why the Hendersons' Murdoch's smile twisted? Because they found what I needed. And I don't like loose ends. He cocked the hammer. 30 feet away, Thorne crouched behind the porch bench, his rifle lowered not out of fear, but by choice, because in his hand behind his back, a second stick of dynamite hissed with life. The fuse was already half gone. "Let her go," Thorne called out. "You shoot her, you die too. I'll take that gamble," Murdoch snapped. "No," Thorne said. "You won't." With a powerful motion, he flung the dynamite. It bounced once, then landed at Murdoch's feet. His eyes widened. He dove, but too late. The blast roared across the porch flame and force, engulfing the wooden stairs and the man who'd brought murder to Thorne's gate. The explosion flung Murdoch backward like a rag doll. His gun clattered to the dirt, smoking and useless. Silence fell sudden and vast. Sarah stared at the charred remains of the porch. Then she collapsed backward, gasping. Thorne rushed to her, cradled her gently. Her face was streaked with sweat and soot, but her eyes were clear. "You all right?" She nodded. "He's gone." Thorne looked toward the blackened heap where Murdoch had been. "He's gone. The final rider." Murdoch's last man was nowhere to be seen. Likely he'd fled during the chaos, realizing the battle was lost and the cost too high. The ranch was ruined in places, fence blown out, porch, scorched water trough, shattered, but they had survived. More importantly, They had won. Sarah closed her eyes just for a moment. That little girl, Sarah Henderson, she can rest now. Thorne looked at her, remembering the fire in her eyes, the way she'd stood even while bleeding. "You gave her justice," he said quietly. "No," Sarah whispered. "We did." 3 days passed before the dust rose again on the Southern Trail. This time it didn't bring killers but law. Sheriff Morrison rode in at the head of a 5-man posse, their horses' lathered eyes sharp. The news of a shootout at Whitmore Ranch had traveled faster than expected. Bodies left in the dirt always spoke louder than rumors. Thorne was on the porch when they arrived, hammer in hand, repairing what he could of the exploded steps. The blast marks still stained the floorboards, the blood had faded into the soil, and the wind carried the acrid scent of gunpowder even now. Sarah sat nearby, arm in a sling, eyes steady but distant. Healing slowly, Whitmore Morrison greeted, tipping his hat. Thorne gave a short nod. "Sheriff?" The lawman dismounted, scanning the scene, the half-burned fence line, the scattered debris, the bullet holes. His eyes landed on Sarah, then on the fresh grave markers near the edge of the property. "We got word something went bad out here," Morrison said. "Looks like that wasn't a lie." "It wasn't," Thorne replied. 4 men rode in, led by Kane Murdoch. Morrison's jaw tightened at the name. Murdoch's been a problem for years. Always slipped between jurisdictions. No one could pin anything on him. "You can now." Sarah said, her voice calm. "I saw what he did. To the Henderson family." Morrison turned to her fully. "You the witness, I'm the reason they're dead," she said, voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "Because I saw him kill them. All of them. Even the little girl." The posse went quiet. Morrison gave her a long look, then nodded. "You willing to testify I am?" Sarah said without hesitation. "Every word." The sheriff exhaled like a man who'd waited years to hear those words. "Then we finally have what we need. Dead Rock's not going to protect his name anymore." He signaled to one of his men who brought over a sack. Inside was what they'd recovered from Murdoch's saddlebag silver ore samples, bloody gloves, and a half-burned deed to the Henderson claim. "Looks like they killed the family for their strike," Morrison said grimly. "Figured they could cover it up and walk away rich?" He glanced again at the graves. They almost did. Thorne stepped down from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. Sarah risked her life to tell the truth. She deserves protection. She'll have it, Morrison promised. "I'll escort her to Denver myself if it comes to that." He hesitated, then looked Thorne over. "You've got a reputation, you know, from the war. People used to talk about what you did and what it cost." Thorne didn't reply. "I always wondered why a man like you disappeared out here," the sheriff continued. "Now I think I understand. You weren't hiding from your past. You were waiting to make it matter." Thorne didn't argue. After the sheriff and his men rode off, taking the bodies and evidence with them, quiet returned to the ranch. But it was no longer the kind of silence Thorne had once clung to. It was the kind born of peace, earned, not peace fled to. That evening, as the sun burned low on the horizon, Sarah sat beside him on the half-rebuilt porch. She watched the sky change colors while cattle drifted lazily across the pasture. "You could have let them kill me," she said softly. "Would have been easier." Thorne shook his head. "Would have been cowardly." Sarah glanced at him, lips curling faintly. "So what now?" "You have options," he said. "Sheriff can take you to Denver. Clean start. New name. No one knows your story there." Sarah looked out at the land, the hills, the fences, the rough timber house. It was broken in places, but whole in spirit. And for the first time in years, so was she. "What if I don't want to run anymore?" she asked. Thorn met her gaze. "Then stay. Doing whatever you want. But this ranch could use an extra set of hands," he added, almost shy, "and a woman's touch wouldn't hurt." Sarah's laugh was soft but real. "I've been running so long I forgot what it felt like to stop." Thorn smiled back. "Feels like this." And together they watched the last light slip below the horizon. Two people scarred by life, but no longer ruled by it. Justice had been served, peace had been earned, and home after so long had been found. 6 months later, the land looked different. The charred porch had been rebuilt with care, each board placed by Thorn's own hands. This time not for solitude, but for sharing. New fence posts stood along the southern line, stronger and straighter than before. The water trough had been replaced and the barn's doors creaked a little less with every sunrise. But the most noticeable change wasn't wood or nails. It was laughter. Not loud, not constant, but real. It drifted out from the kitchen window where Sarah's voice now lived, humming over the clatter of tin pots or soft conversation at dawn. Her steps echoed through the home that once held only silence. And Thorn, once a ghost of his own past, had learned to live again one morning at a time. He'd asked her to stay, not out of guilt or obligation, but because she'd reminded him what it was meant to care about, what it meant to hope, what it meant to protect something more than land and cattle. She'd stayed not because she was broken, but because the ground here let her heal. They found rhythm in the ranch life, the kind that wrapped around wounds and stitched them quietly shut. Sarah worked beside him, mending fences, brushing the horses sometimes, even fixing supper with a recipe she swore was almost edible. At night, they'd sit side by side on the porch, her head resting on his shoulders, their hands linked without needing words. No promises spoken aloud, no grand confessions, just a mutual understanding that home wasn't a place. It was a person, and they had found it in each other. Word spread about what had happened that day, how a reclusive rancher had taken on Kane Murdoch's gang and lived, how a wounded woman brought down a killer with her testimony, how a ranch, once forgotten by time, became a symbol of resistance and redemption. Travelers would stop by on occasion, some for supplies, some just to shake Thorn's hand. Most left with more than they brought. A story, a kind word, a reminder that courage still blooms in the hard corners of the West. Sheriff Morrison came by once in a while, too usually with updates from Dead Rock. The trial had passed. Murdoch's name was finally buried under a weight of evidence and shame. The Henderson claim had been returned to surviving relatives. Justice, slow but sure, had taken root. "You did good," the sheriff had told Thorn on his last visit. "You both did." And Thorn had believed it because it was the first time in years he didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. He was a man who'd face them down. One chilly morning, Sarah stood in the doorway, wrapped in his coat, steam rising from her coffee. "You know," she said, "you never really asked me." Thorn raised a brow from where he was feeding the horses. "Asked you what if I wanted to be more than just a set of extra hands?" He paused, then smiled. "Figured you already knew." "I do," she said, "but it's nice to hear." He crossed the yard in long strides, pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Well, then let me make it clear. This isn't just your job. This is your home. I want you here for good." Sarah didn't answer with words. Just lean in, eyes closing, and let her breath melt into him. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, they sat on the porch again, watching cattle move like shadows across the field. Coyotes howled far off, but their calls no longer felt like threats. Thorn's rifle still leans beside the door, cleaned, oiled, unused. Some battles once won stayed won, and some peace once earned lasts a lifetime. Life lesson from the story. Blood on the fence. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us. Thorn Whitmore lived in silence for 12 years, believing that isolation was safety, that shutting out the world was the only way to keep pain away. But when Sarah collapsed on his fence bleeding, hunted desperate, he was faced with a choice: stay in the shadows or risk everything for a stranger. He chose compassion, and in doing so, he rediscovered his purpose. This story reminds us that courage doesn't always come with noise or glory. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like offering water to the wounded or standing your ground when it would be easier to turn away. Thorn didn't save Sarah because he had to. He saved her because he recognized the same brokenness in her that once lived in him. We are all carrying stories, some heavy, some hidden. But the moment we choose kindness over fear, truth over safety, we change more than our own fate. We change someone else's. The world needs more people like Thorn, people who act not because it's easy, but because it's right. In our daily lives, we may never face gunmen at our gates, but we will meet others who are hurting, lost, or afraid. And when we do, we must remember helping even one person may bring more healing than we know to them and to ourselves. That's how peace begins. Not in silence, but in shared humanity.